I was never the daughter they wanted, not really. I was just convenient, quiet, obedient. A filler between their golden son and their family name. From the moment I could walk, it was like my existence was designed around his comfort. Bring him water, they'd say. Clean his shoes. Don't argue with your brother, he's tired from school. Even though I was the same age, even though I came home just as tired, I was never allowed to say no. It started with small things, chores, errands, silent tolerance. But as we grew up, the demands didn't stop. In fact, they evolved into something worse. When I turned 17, my brother failed out of college. He came back home angry and bitter, but instead of blaming him, my parents redirected their disappointment toward me. Suddenly, I was tasked with everything: his laundry, his meals, his phone calls, his appointments. It didn't matter that I had my own school, my own life. In their eyes, he was the future and I was the support system, the unpaid maid, with no voice. I still remember the moment the expectation became official, like a final stamp on my silence. My mother told me, eyes unblinking, "From now on, your only job is to make your brother's life easier." It was as if she had read from a script written generations ago where daughters were furniture and sons were royalty. But something inside me cracked. For the first time, I said no. Just one word. That was all it took to shatter years of unspoken submission and summon a fury I wasn't prepared for. My dad, hearing me from the other room, stormed in with thunder on his face. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't care why I refused. His hand flew before his words did. A slap so hard it felt like it split my childhood from my soul. And, just like that, everything changed. The room went quiet. My mother flinched. My brother smirked. And I stood still, holding my burning cheek, and made a silent vow. I would never be anyone's maid again. Not in this house. Not in this life. I locked myself in my room that night, unsure whether to cry or scream or just disappear. The slap hadn't just hurt my face, it cracked open a truth I'd tried to ignore my whole life. They never saw me as a person. I was a placeholder, an unpaid servant, wrapped in familial obligation. But something strange happened in that silence. A fire, a cold kind of fire. I stared at the wall and began to plan. Not just to leave, but to rise. To vanish so thoroughly from their control that one day they'd look around and realize they had lost something valuable. Not because I was bitter, though I was, but because I finally saw myself as worth more than a doormat. That same night, I emailed every scholarship I could find. I applied for late admissions. I reached out to distant relatives, people who might shelter me, even if only for a while. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I packed quietly the next morning, stuffing my hopes and fears into a second-hand suitcase. My father's slap still echoed in my head, but now it was fuel, not fear. When I finally walked out the front door, no one stopped me. Not a word, not even a question. It was like they expected me to crawl back, like this was a tantrum I'd regret. But they underestimated what happens when a girl gets tired of being invisible. The first few days on my own were terrifying in ways I hadn't imagined. I had left home with barely enough money for 2 weeks of survival. My distant aunt, more an acquaintance than a relative, agreed to let me stay in her attic, but the rules were strict. I was to stay out of sight when her guests were over, never use her kitchen during mealtimes, and keep my noise to a minimum. But I didn't mind. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for freedom, and every uncomfortable hour was a reminder that I had made the right decision. The attic was dusty, full of spiders, and the thin mattress hurt my back, but it was mine, my air, my silence. I spent my days buried in scholarship work, and nights practicing interview questions, typing essays until my fingers felt numb. I cleaned my aunt's garage and repainted her fence to earn a little extra. Every coin went into a jar labeled escape. I didn't even own a proper phone, just an old keypad model with no internet. I borrowed a laptop from the local library and sat there until closing time every night. There were moments I wanted to break, especially when I passed happy families at the park or heard mothers calling their daughters home for dinner. I longed for that softness, but I also knew I had never had it, and longing for illusions was a luxury I could no longer afford. Then, one rainy Thursday, my email pinged with a notification that changed everything. A full scholarship, not partial, full. Tuition, housing, books, all covered. I sat frozen in that library chair for what felt like an hour, reading the words over and over, as if they might disappear if I blinked too hard. A full ride to a university 3 states away, far from my father's hand, my mother's silence, and my brother's entitled smirk. I whispered a thank you to no one in particular, maybe to the universe, or maybe to the version of me that had dared to say no. I moved out of the attic 2 weeks later, boarding a bus with 2 bags and a heart pounding with terror and triumph. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just went. The moment the bus crossed the border out of my home state, I pressed my forehead against the window and cried. For the girl I used to be, for the girl I was becoming, for the girl who was finally free. The university campus was unlike anything I had ever seen. Trees lined the walkways like ancient guardians, and students bustled with purpose and laughter. It smelled of coffee, fresh pages, and new beginnings. I clutched my enrollment packet with both hands, afraid that if I let go, the entire dream would vanish. My dorm room was tiny, but to me it was a palace. I decorated it with thrifted posters and string lights, slowly reclaiming the pieces of myself that had been buried for years. Classes were hard. I wasn't used to freedom or choice, not even over my thoughts. The first time a professor asked for my opinion, I froze. I wasn't used to being asked. I'd spent so long being told what to do, think and feel that having a voice felt like learning to breathe underwater. But I pushed through. I started sitting in the front row, raising my hand even when it trembled. I joined a debate club not because I loved arguing, but because I wanted to challenge the silence I had lived in. I got a part-time job in the campus library, shelving books and helping students find resources. Every paycheck I'd smile, remembering how I used to work for free cooking and cleaning for people who didn't even say thank you. And slowly, my identity began to rebuild. Not around someone else's needs, but my own dreams. I made friends, real ones. They didn't care about my past, only who I was when I showed up. I laughed without flinching. I danced in my room when no one was watching. I even wrote poetry, something I hadn't done since I was a child. But just as I began to feel safe in my new life, an email came from home, short, cold, and sharp. Your brother is getting married. You're expected to attend. No name, no warmth, just a command. For a moment, I hovered over the delete button, but then I thought maybe it was time not to go back, but to show them who I had become, not the maid they tried to create, but the woman they could never control. I spent weeks deciding what to wear, not because I wanted to impress them, but because I wanted to honor the self I had fought so hard to become. I settled on a simple but elegant maroon dress, one that made me feel powerful, grounded, and untouchable. As the wedding day approached, anxiety wrestled with confidence. Would they mock me again? Would my father raise his hand once more? Would my mother still pretend I didn't exist? But I kept reminding myself, I wasn't going as their daughter. I was going as myself. When I arrived, the house was buzzing, with decorations and relatives I barely recognized. Some looked surprised to see me. Others avoided my gaze altogether. My brother barely nodded. My father didn't speak. My mother looked at me like I was a ghost, but I didn't flinch. I held my head high and moved like I belonged, because I did, not in their house, but in my skin. The wedding ceremony was extravagant. My brother's bride was polished and smiling, clearly coached in the art of appearances. I watched silently as my parents fussed over them like royalty. I was given a seat at the back, near the kitchen staff. I didn't complain. I just observed. Every joke, every insult, every side-eye aimed at me. I recorded it quietly, filing it away not as pain, but as proof. Proof that I was no longer one of them, that I had grown beyond their reach. Then, just as the ceremony ended and the couple posed for pictures, a voice behind me said, "Is that you?" I turned and saw my cousin, older now, but his eyes, still kind. He had joined the Air Force years ago. We hadn't spoken in forever. He smiled, stepped forward, and to everyone's shock, saluted me. "I heard what you did, leaving, surviving, becoming your own person. That takes more courage than anything I've seen in the field." The room fell into stunned silence. My father's jaw clenched. My mother blinked rapidly. My brother froze mid-laugh. And for the first time, I felt something shift. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was the story they would whisper about. Behind closed doors, the one who got away and never looked back. From that moment on, I knew my presence had already achieved what I came for. Not revenge, not acceptance, just a reminder that I existed, that I had built something without them. My cousin's salute had been more than a gesture. It was a symbol, a validation, a public declaration that I was no longer someone to be pitied, mocked, or ignored. I left before the reception ended. I didn't need cake or compliments. I didn't need their eyes chasing after me. I simply walked out, head high, heart steady, heels clicking like a drumbeat of freedom. When I returned to campus, something inside me had settled. I no longer carried the weight of their expectations. I was no longer trying to prove anything. My grades soared. My confidence bloomed. I was offered an internship in New York, fully paid, with housing. I moved there the following summer, wide-eyed and ready. The city was chaos and charm, exhaustion, and exhilaration. I worked under one of the top legal teams in the country, filing documents by day and reading cases by night. I saw women in heels commanding boardrooms, girls like me rewriting their stories from scratch. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream without limits. I pictured a future where I ran my own firm, where I helped girls like me find their power. And every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of that slap, that first moment of defiance, that line in the sand that turned pain into purpose. Years passed. I graduated with honors and was offered a permanent position at the firm that had once taken a chance on me. I rented my first apartment, a modest studio with creaky floors and a view of a fire escape, and it felt like a castle. I filled it with warm lights, bookshelves, and plants that thrived on neglect. Just like I once had. Life was far from perfect. There were nights when memories haunted me. The smell of that old house, the hollow sound of silence after a command, the sting of my father's palm. But I had learned how to process the pain instead of burying it. I had found therapy, friends, and mentors who reminded me that trauma isn't shameful. Silence is. Then one winter morning, I received a letter. An actual letter, not an email. The handwriting was shaky and familiar. It was from my mother. "Your father is ill," it began. "He's asking for you." No apologies. No warmth. Just a brittle invitation coated in guilt. I sat on the edge of my bed for hours, letter in hand. Part of me wanted to rip it apart. Another part, the part that still remembered lullabies and childhood laughter, whispered, "Maybe he's changed." I didn't rush. I didn't pack right away. I took a week to think, to ask myself what I wanted, not what was expected, and finally I went. Not to fix things, not to forgive, but to see for myself what remained of the people who had once tried to break me when I arrived. The house was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just grown too big for its walls. My father lay in a recliner, thinner now, weaker. His eyes, once filled with command, were clouded. My mother stood in the corner, still silent, still watching. My brother wasn't there. He'd moved to another city. Apparently. "You came," my father whispered. I nodded, not because I forgave him, but because I had healed enough to face him without fear. "Why?" he asked. His voice cracked. After everything, I looked at him, really looked, and realized he was no longer the giant I had feared. He was just a man, a broken one. "Because I needed to see that I survived you," I said. His lips trembled, but no tears came. There were no apologies, no dramatic monologue, just silence, heavy and thick with what would never be said. I stayed for 20 minutes. I left a card on the table with my number in case they ever needed help, not because they deserved it, but because I had become someone who offered it anyway. That night, I sat in my hotel room staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I realized I didn't need closure. I had outgrown the need for explanations. My healing wasn't dependent on their remorse. It was rooted in my own growth, my own boundaries, my own story. Months later, my father passed. I didn't cry. I didn't go to the funeral. I lit a candle in my apartment and whispered goodbye to a version of my life that had long ended. My mother called once after that. Just once. She asked how I was. I said I was well. She didn't ask anything else. I didn't offer. Our conversation lasted 2 minutes and ended with quiet static. My brother never reached out, and I never searched for him. We had taken different paths. His paved by entitlement. Mine forged in fire, and I had no interest in looking back. As the years rolled forward, I continued to rise. I started my own practice, small at first but fierce. I specialized in defending women who had been silenced, dismissed, or mistreated. Every client was a reminder of who I had once been, and every victory was a message to the girl who once took a slap and stayed quiet. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who chose herself every single day, and the world had no choice but to respect her. I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference 5 years after opening my firm. I hesitated at first. I wasn't one for microphones or stages, but something deep inside nudged me forward. The day of the conference, I wore the same maroon dress from my brother's wedding, a symbol of defiance, survival, and rebirth. When I stepped onto that stage, I looked out at the sea of faces, young, old, weary, hopeful. I cleared my throat and told them my story. Not just the facts, but the feelings, the fear, the fury, the freedom. I spoke of the slap, of the attic, of the bus ride into the unknown, and when I finished, there was silence, then applause, then tears. Dozens of women lined up to hug me, thank me, share their own truths. That night, I understood that my pain had never been pointless. It had become purpose, power, and proof that no matter how deep the wound, healing is possible. Not through revenge, not through anger, but through choosing to live fully, loudly, and without shame. In the years that followed, I published a book. I called it The Daughter They Didn't Want It. became a quiet bestseller, passed from hand to hand, whispered about in book clubs, quoted on social media. It wasn't a revenge memoir, it was a roadmap, a hand reaching back for every girl who had ever been told she was too much, too little, too wrong. I began receiving letters from readers around the world, daughters, sons, mothers, even fathers. Some apologized for their silence, others found the courage to leave toxic homes. My story had become a spark, and it humbled me, because I knew what it had cost. The loneliness, the fear, the nights I cried into a pillow wondering if I had made a mistake. But I hadn't. I had simply done what no one else dared to do. I had chosen myself, even when it meant standing alone. And in doing so, I had found a life more beautiful than anything I could have imagined inside that house. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the girl who was slapped for refusing to serve. I see a woman who stood back up. Again and again, I see a warrior in lipstick, a survivor in heels, a storm in silence. I live in a sunlit apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. I water my plants every Sunday. I call my found family, friends, mentors, chosen sisters whenever I need to feel loved. And sometimes, late at night, I write letters I'll never send. To my father, to my mother, to the version of me who once believed she had no worth. I tell her, you were never a maid. You were magic. You were fire. And you were never theirs to control. I keep those letters in a box labeled freedom. And when the world feels heavy again, I open it, read them out loud, and remind myself I didn't escape. I rebuilt. I didn't run away. I rose. I didn't just say no. I said yes to myself, to my future, to a life where love is not earned through obedience, but given freely without fear. And that changed everything.